Now I'm going to say on this video why I think it's not true that your network is always your net worth. Now a lot of people say your network is more important than your net worth. And the basic theory goes like this. If you have, for example, I don't know, $1 million, $2 million invested, so your net worth's a couple of $1 million or whatever it is, you might be able to get, I don't know, $40,000, $80,000 from that particular wealth in income per year. But if you've got a really good network, you're much more likely to make more money than that. So therefore, having a big network is more important than having a big net worth. Now, I'm not saying having a good network isn't important, but there's a number of problems with that theory. Now, number one, first of all, it only tends to work when you're at the top of your game, not when you really need to make money. Now, what do I mean by that? If you're at your peak, whether you're, I don't know, a lawyer, an advisor, an accountant, whatever you are, you're at the peak of your powers, you're doing really well in business, it's true to say that if you have more clients, more people in your network, you're more likely to get more clients, right? So it's a kind of perpetual cycle. You're on an upward trajectory and you're doing well. However, let's face it, when you're doing badly, you're much less likely to make use of that network. I've run out of the number of people on LinkedIn and beyond who have been, for example, former presidents of Chamber of Commerce, people who are incredibly well networked, who actually are looking for jobs and actually can't find any work at the moment. And at the end of the day, and I've seen it time and time again at networking events and beyond, if somebody's at their peak of their powers, everyone wants to talk to them. But if you've got, say, a 55-year-old, 60-year-old who's been struggling for 5 or 10 years, a network in that situation isn't as useful as if you're at the peak of your powers. And that kind of leads me on to number two, and that's shallowness and wishful thinking. A lot of human relationships, whether we like it or not, are partially or fully based on shallowness. So a lot of people, they'll spend years and even 10, 20 years going to the same events, meeting the same people. They think these people are really useful to them. And maybe the other person thinks the same thing. There's usually not any slyness. However, a lot of the time, people only realize many years later that a lot of these relationships were partially based on shallowness. And linked to that is wishful thinking. It would be very lovely to think that, who we know could kind of compensate for a lack of wealth. But in reality, it's never the same, because if you actually have wealth in your hand, it gives you more options. Whereas if you're depending on your network, you're dependent on other people, and you should never actually depend on other people as much as depending on yourself. And in moments like this, where many people are looking for jobs or looking for opportunities, that's more likely to be an issue. And I think also a final thing really is if you actually go to many networking events, you'll actually find there's a lot of people who, they tell you after a few drinks that they're actually pretty broke. And you might say, well, that's the same for large sections of society. Maybe 80 or 90% of society all around the world are broke because they spend too much, or they're not earning enough or whatever it is. But it shows a very important point that there's plenty of people who have got huge networks who go to every single networking event under the sun and they're completely broke. You get other people, for example, some tech geeks that I know who just stay at home all day and they've been doing that for 10 years. And some of them are worth a fortune, making more than these well-networked people. Because at the end of the day as well, the trend of the world is more and more towards online. If you think about it, 20 years ago, what would you have done if you needed an accountant or a lawyer? You would have probably asked your friendship network. Whereas these days, what's the first thing you might do? If you're like me, you're going to Google, right? So that's a huge difference in the world now. And I've noticed it in my business. I get referred a lot to other clients, but at the same time, it's a lesser thing than say 5 or 10 years ago, because now most of my clients come to me from online, and that's the go-to thing now. Getting a referral from somebody who is your friend, that's great, but let's face it, it's not as great as looking at, 30 different reviews online. So most people, their go-to now is something online. So actually those face-to-face relationships, they still absolutely matter, and people should do both. Online, offline, network, focusing on net worth as well. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm not saying networks aren't important at all, but they're less important in many ways compared to the past. I was speaking to a gentleman a few days ago, and he runs a sales organization. He said to me, Adam, one of the huge differences I've noticed, he runs a real estate company, by the way, between 20 years ago and today, is now an introverted real estate salesman can do very well. Whereas 20 years ago, it was exceptionally difficult, because think about the world we live in today. That person could just be behind their computer, indeed looking at networks, but in a different way to traditionally. Whereas there's a lot of people who still hold on to that idea that in business it's important to kind of clink the champagne glasses, going to Chamber of Commerce events, but usually they're actually not that useful. And I read a great article, which I'll put below, which showed that 99% of networking events aren't that useful. So it's a bit like the 80-20 rule, right? That only about 20% of your activities are that useful. And I think in networking now, there's a very small percentage of events or networks or people you could meet that are exceptionally useful, but probably an absolute maximum of 5%. But as per this academic study, it's probably more like 1 or 2% of networking events or networks are even useful in the first place. Okay, everyone, I've got some really exciting news today. So for a couple of years now, many people have asked me, well, look, I can't afford your minimum investments, but I really like your advice. I don't know if you can do this or you can do that, or you can help me in that way, or you can't help me in that way. I've always said, no, I can only do this or that, but I've got some really exciting news, and that's that in a couple of months before the end of the year, I will be bringing out what I'm calling the Adam Fayed Academy, which will have many new areas which will be of interest to people. So things like mentoring, tutoring, all those kind of things that people have asked me for in the past. So stay tuned. I'm going to be announcing it in the next few months, but I thought I would tell it to you guys before. Let me know if there's anything in particular that you're looking for in this academy. We're going to be focusing on many different areas, including how to invest productively, also some business areas, because that's another thing people have asked me about before. So stay tuned, and I'll keep you up to date.